You swallow a spoonful of coconut oil, and within 2 hours, your liver is flooded with fatty acids it has to package and ship out into your bloodstream. LDL particles, the ones that carry cholesterol directly into your artery walls, spike. Not by a little, by a measurable, repeatable amount that shows up in trial after trial. And the wildest part is you probably bought that jar because someone told you it was the healthy option. Here is the myth that built the whole coconut oil empire. Lauric acid, the main fat in coconut oil, gets classified as a medium-chain fatty acid based on its carbon count. Medium-chain fats have a real metabolic shortcut. They skip normal digestion, go straight to your liver, and get burned for energy. That sounds amazing. The problem is, lauric acid does not actually take that shortcut. Metabolic studies show that 70 to 75% of the lauric acid you eat enters the slow lane, the same lymphatic lipoprotein pathway used by the saturated fats in butter and beef. It gets packed into the same particles. It raises LDL the same way. In some trials, worse. The carbon count says medium chain. Your bloodstream says otherwise. So what you have been told is a health food behaves inside your body almost identically to the saturated fats you were told to avoid. That gap between the label and the biology is where the real story lives. Today, we are breaking this down mechanism by mechanism. What is actually in coconut oil at the molecular level, what each fatty acid does to your blood lipids, how those lipid changes physically damage your artery walls over years, what the clinical outcome data really shows when you strip away the cherry-picked studies, and what fats you should be cooking with instead based on hard cardiovascular evidence. By the end, you will understand the exact chain of events from swallowing that spoonful to plaque forming inside your arteries, and you will know precisely what to swap it for. Let us start with what is actually in the jar. Coconut oil is 82% saturated fat. That is higher than butter at 63%, higher than lard at 40%. If saturated fat were alcohol, coconut oil would be the strongest drink on the shelf, and most people have no idea they are pouring it. The dominant fat in that jar is lauric acid, making up about 47% of the total. After that comes myristic acid at 18%, then palmitic acid at 9%. Those three alone account for nearly 3/4 of everything in coconut oil, and all three raise LDL cholesterol. Here is where the marketing falls apart. Only about 15% of coconut oil is made up of the truly medium-chain fats, the short ones like caprylic and caprich acid that actually do take a shortcut to your liver for quick energy. Lauric acid gets called medium-chain because of its carbon count, 12 carbons, which technically qualifies, but your digestive system does not read labels. When you eat lauric acid, 70 to 75% of it enters the lymphatic system, gets packed into large lipoprotein particles, and rides through your bloodstream the exact same way the saturated fat from a cheeseburger does. The portal vein shortcut that makes real MCTs interesting barely applies here. And there is an irony worth catching. The MCT oil sold in health food stores, the concentrated stuff people add to coffee, it's actually the small fraction extracted out of coconut oil. The caprylic and capric acids get pulled out and bottled separately, which means the coconut oil left behind in the jar you cook with is even more heavily loaded with the long-chain saturated fats that do the damage. You thought you were getting the benefits of MCTs. You were getting what was left after the real MCTs were removed. One more thing before we move on from what is in the jar. Virgin versus refined coconut oil. Virgin keeps more of the polyphenols, the plant compounds that have some antioxidant activity. Refined strips most of those out, But the saturated fat profile, the part that actually hits your bloodstream, is virtually identical in both. Choosing virgin over refined is like choosing a filtered cigarette. The main problem has not changed. So what happens once those fats hit your blood? Your liver has a cleanup system for LDL particles. Think of it like a dock with a limited number of loading bays. Each bay is an LDL receptor, a protein on the surface of liver cells that grabs LDL particles out of the blood and pulls them in for recycling. Lauric acid and myristic acid dial down the number of those receptors. Fewer loading bays, fewer particles cleared, more LDL circulating in your bloodstream. That is not a theory. A meta-analysis pooling 16 controlled trials found that coconut oil raised LDL by about 10 milligrams per deciliter compared to non-tropical vegetable oils. 10 points might not sound dramatic on a lab printout, but hold that number, because in a few minutes, you will see what even a small sustained rise does to an artery over 20 or 30 years. Now you might have heard the counter-argument. Coconut oil also raises HDL, the so-called good cholesterol, so the ratio stays balanced. That defense made sense 15 years ago. It doesn't anymore. Drug trials that raised HDL by huge amounts using a class of medications called CETP inhibitors showed zero reduction in heart attacks. Raising HDL through saturated fat appears to be cosmetic, not protective. The number on your lab report goes up. Your arteries do not care. What does predict plaque buildup is the total number of LDL particles in your blood, measured by a protein called ApoB. Every single plaque-building particle carries one ApoB molecule. One particle, one ApoB. So when coconut oil raises your LDL, it is raising the actual count of particles that can enter your artery wall. And here is the part that surprises most people. In head-to-head trials, coconut oil raises LDL more than butter. The plant-based oil with the health halo performs worse on the single most important cardiovascular biomarker than the animal fat everyone already knows to limit. Those LDL particles are not just floating around waiting to be harmless. They are looking for a way in. Your arteries are lined with a single layer of cells called the endothelium, a barrier thinner than plastic wrap. LDL particles small enough, under 70 nanometers, slip through that barrier and get trapped underneath it, inside the artery wall itself. Once stuck there, they oxidize. They go rancid, basically, and your immune system notices. White blood cells called macrophages rush in to clean up the oxidized LDL, swallowing particle after particle until they are bloated and immobile. These stuffed macrophages are called foam cells, and they are the foundation of every plaque that has ever caused a heart attack. Here is the critical concept. Your arteries do not clog like a pipe. Plaque does not build up on the inner surface the way grease coats a drain. It grows inside the wall itself, pushing outward for years, remodeling the artery around it. The opening blood flows through stays the same size for a long time. This is exactly why a stress test can come back clean while plaque is already growing underneath the surface. By the time plaque bulges inward enough to restrict flow, the disease is advanced, and for roughly half of people who develop heart disease, the first symptom is the heart attack itself. No warning, no chest pain on a treadmill, no chance to catch it early with a standard test. The thing that makes this relevant to coconut oil specifically is cumulative exposure. Atherosclerosis is not about one bad meal or one bad month. It is about total LDL exposure over your entire life, measured in milligrams per deciliter multiplied by years. Genetic studies using Mendelian randomization, which is the closest thing to a lifelong controlled experiment, confirm that the relationship between LDL and atherosclerosis is causal, not correlated, causal. A sustained 10 milligram per deciliter increase, exactly the amount coconut oil produces over vegetable oils, compounding over decades, meaningfully shifts your lifetime cardiovascular risk. So, does the outcome data save coconut oil? No. And here is why that question is the wrong one to begin with. No long-term randomized trial has ever tested coconut oil against actual cardiovascular events like heart attacks, strokes, or death. That trial does not exist. The American Heart Association reviewed every major saturated fat study in 2017, and their conclusion was blunt. Coconut oil has no offsetting favorable effects that compensate for its LDL-raising impact. But what about the island populations, the Tokelau, the Kitavans, the traditional Sri Lankan diets? These are real people who ate enormous amounts of coconut and supposedly thrived, except they ate whole coconut flesh, not refined oil. They ate it alongside high fiber, fresh fish, and virtually zero processed food. And the Tokelau Islanders, the single most cited population in defense of coconut, actually had higher rates of cardiovascular disease than neighboring populations eating less coconut. The poster child for the defense is evidence for the prosecution. Recent systematic reviews from 2023 and 2024 continue to confirm the same finding. Coconut oil raises LDL. No study has shown it reduces cardiovascular events. The file is closed on this one. So, what do you use instead? The answer is not just removing coconut oil. It is what you replace it with. Swap saturated fat for polyunsaturated fat and coronary heart disease. Risk drops by about 25% per 5% of calories replaced. That is not a small effect. That is one of the most consistent findings in nutrition science. Extra virgin olive oil is the strongest candidate. 73% of it is oleic acid, a monounsaturated fat, plus it carries polyphenols with their own anti-inflammatory effects independent of the fat itself. The PREDIME trial, one of the largest dietary intervention studies ever run, showed a 30% reduction in cardiovascular events for the group assigned to extra virgin olive oil. For high heat cooking, avocado oil handles temperatures up to 520 degrees and carries a similar monounsaturated fat profile. Refined olive oil works at 470. Both outperform coconut oil on lipid impact and thermal stability. And canola oil, which gets attacked constantly in wellness circles, consistently performs among the best in clinical trials for lowering LDL. The gap between its reputation and its data is one of the widest in all of nutrition. Coconut oil does have one legitimate use, and it has nothing to do with your arteries. On your skin, it strengthens the moisture barrier. On your hair, it reduces protein loss. Topically, it is genuinely useful. The problem was never coconut oil existing. The problem was putting it in a skillet and calling it medicine. Think about where you started. Coconut oil in the pan, a vague sense that it was the cleaner choice, maybe something you saw in a recipe or read on a label. Now you can trace the entire chain. Lauric acid enters your bloodstream. Your liver pulls fewer LDL particles out of circulation. Those particles slip through your artery walls, oxidize, trigger inflammation, and quietly build plaque that grows for decades without a single symptom. That is not a headline. That is a mechanism. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The single highest impact swap you can make is replacing coconut oil with extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil as your daily cooking fat. Not because someone told you to, because you now understand what each fat molecule does once it enters your blood. If you want to know where you actually stand, ask for an ApoB test. It counts the exact number of plaque-building particles in your bloodstream, and it is far more precise than the standard LDL number most lab panels report. Natural is not a safety rating. Coconut oil is natural. So is arsenic. Every fat you eat has a specific metabolic fate, a specific destination inside your body, and a specific effect on the walls of your arteries. Understanding that fate is more protective than any label on any jar. 2 hours from now, someone somewhere will take a spoonful of coconut oil because they believe it is good for their heart. You now know exactly where those LDL particles are headed, what they do when they get there, and what you can use instead. That is not fear. That is vision.